thank you for coming out this evening. It's an honor to be here. I really love being in the United Kingdom. It's really fun when I'm here. And I love to share time with good people, especially the Muslims. So I want to thank you all for coming. I think it's important for me to note that I'm not a special Muslim, right? I teach jujitsu, and it's the only part of the sunnah that I actually know well. So if you start asking me questions about fiqh or akida and sharia and different stuff, it's probably not gonna work. I'm not, I'm not qualified for all that. I have lectured on different aspects of Muslim history at Brown University, Harvard, and Stanford. Mostly that's been around the Moorish Empire and some of the stuff that dealt with the Turks and history and culture. I've also lectured on the history of Islam in Black America, right? In Black America. So that's where a lot of my work has been. When I was young, when I was in high school, and fresh out, I met, people like Eazy-E, Tupac, later on Wu-Tang Clan, other, there's a little bit of feedback, and other Muslims, in hip hop. And so it's been a big part of my life. I've written about that extensively. That's a lot of my first work in hip hop journalism, was writing about the relationship between hip hop and Islam, which most people don't know about, and that's fine because it makes sense that they wouldn't know about it. So first I'll just kind of talk about how I came into being a part of the early hip hop community and what that was about. So for a lot of people in hip hop today, they'll probably say groups like Public Enemy, or there's another group called Gang Starr, or even Wu-Tang Clan, kind of introduced them to Islam. But my life was a little different because I grew up middle class and I had both parents, right? And that makes a big difference, right, in how you come out. Having both parents in the household is important. And my relationship with my father was very good, still good. My relationship with my mother is good, still good. And so, but when I grew up, I was very small. I was very physically weak. Most of my friends were way bigger than me. And so I was the runt of the crew. But my household was always really filled with music. And so, in 1982, I went to my cousin Steve's house, and he had a boombox radio, and he was playing some music that I'd never heard before, and I was like, yo, this is amazing, what is this? And he was like, oh, this is a mixtape by my friend Jesse at school. This would have been 12 years old, So he was like, oh, I was like, can I dub that? I knew that I wanted to listen to that forever. I knew when I first heard it, I wanted to listen to it forever. So I went and I dubbed it. He was like, yeah, sure. He didn't think anything of it because he was bodybuilding. He was lifting weights, when we were young. I was super skinny just watching him. And so around that time, my birthday was coming. So my dad was like, what do you want for your birthday? I was like, oh, I want 2 turntables and I want a mixer. So he hooked that up. I started working on the turntables, and I just became completely lost in music in a really good way. But it was before that, literally when I was 9 years old, even though I was raised Christian, nominally Christian, my house didn't have a lot of stuff in it, you know what I mean? If it was Christmas or Easter, but it wasn't a very Christian household. But my father worked for the airline, so we went to Spain, and we went to where the Alhambra was, and we were taking a tour. And in the midst of that tour, my father pulled me aside, and the tour kind of went on. And he's like, look, son, Muslims built this, and a lot of them were black, and you need to know that. And I was like, oh, okay. So he's like, let's look at it. And he kind of took me on a tour by himself, you know what I mean, through the Alhambra. And I will never forget that. And then I remember being in King Ferdinand's castle at the top. He picked me up and he pointed across the Strait of Gibraltar and he was like, that's home. Do you understand? Like, that's home. Like, imagine, like, I was 9, but I still remember it, like, super vivid, you know? So then fast forward to 1987, right? And, you know, hip-hop is still kind of getting its baby legs and really picking up. Public Enemy puts out this record called Bring the Noise. And in the very beginning of that, you hear a guy say, too black, too strong. Too black, too strong. And then the song starts. And so I knew that I had heard that before. I knew that I had heard that before. And what it was from Malcolm X, right? Who was one of the greatest Muslims to walk around North America ever. But I didn't know that it was Malcolm X at the time. I just thought it might be Malcolm X. So I was like, hey, Dad, I was like, listen to that. I was like, who is that? He's like, oh, that's Malcolm X. Because he used to play these records for me when I was young, right? Like we would just kind of, he would, on Sundays, because like I said, we didn't really go to church and stuff, he would just play like a Malcolm X speech after we ate. So I knew that Islam existed. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that it was something that wasn't Christianity. And I was curious. So now Public Enemy, who's was and still is one of my favorite hip hop groups ever, I really want to know what's this Malcolm X guy talking about? What is he talking about? So there were 2 records. One was called Ballots or Bullets. The other one was called Message to the Grassroots. All I know is the first one I played, he didn't say it. I kept dropping the needle because I'm just looking for the section, right? I'm used to listening to songs. So I can't find it. So I'm like, all right, I guess I have to listen to the whole thing. So I sit down and I just play the record. First half. Okay, he didn't say it. Turn it over. Oh, those are good points. That's also a good point. That sounds like right now. But you know, these are speeches from the 60s. So all right, well, I guess I got to listen to the other record. So now I listen to the other record. And I'm like, man, like, you know, I can't really explain to you what the political, racial, and social climate was of North America in the 80s, but it was super violent. It was very racial. There was a lot of police violence. There were a lot of protests and things like that. And it sounded like what he was saying, even though it was the 60s, was 1987. Bless you. And so I was like, yo, this is cool. This is cool. So that led me to reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And at the time, I was a young rapper, and I had this crew, and we had done some shows at San Francisco State. And I had used some samples from Malcolm X in this track that I did, and 2 people came up to me. One of them, her name was Kilu Nyasha, and she was one of the first women in the Black Panther Party. And another was a brother who was Muslim. And so they started, I talked to them at different times, but I met them about 10 minutes apart, and they both totally changed my life. So probably I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I read some other things, and then, you know, I converted to Islam, you know, at Masjid al-Islam on 82nd MacArthur, which is in Oakland. And that began like a journey that like has just really led me to this moment right now. Like I wouldn't be sitting here right now if everything I just told you had not happened, you know, by the grace of Allah. Now, a lot of parents rightfully would be concerned about hip hop and what's in the lyrical content, because a lot of it is pretty wild and can be, you know, quite frankly, against most of the ethics that we know as good, right? And things that we want. However, what I want to say is that even though, especially like not being from North America, you wouldn't expect it, hip hop has helped so many people come to Islam. Hip hop has helped so many people come to Islam. It would be hard for me, especially for my generation, in that like late 80s, early 90s generation, it'd be hard for me to even try to calculate how many people have come to Islam in North America because of hip hop, because of Public Enemy, because of another group called Poor Righteous Teachers, because of another rapper named KRS-One, because of Brand Nubian, like because of Rakim. Like these guys weren't always necessarily doing dawah in the way that we might think about it, okay? But like a big part of the lyricism of that time was about having clever things to say, and actually sharing wisdom in the songs. So a lot of times people in the raps would be talking about Mecca and Medina. They would be just ending the song with Assalamu alaikum and things like that. And in the course of wanting to know the lyrics, right, well, then you got to say, well, what does Assalamu alaikum mean? What Medina? What's in Medina? Why would that be important? Why would he put something about Medina in the song? Why would he talk about Mecca? What does that mean? And that starts leading the curiosity. These are like breadcrumbs almost, right? And they kind of lead you back to the Deen of Allah. So how does that connect me to Tupac and stuff like that? So I was with a group called One Nation, and we were kind of a group of different groups. We were kind of like a mega crew. Like we had different like solo rappers, and we had, you know, duo groups and trio groups, but we were called like One Nation. We would go around and we would do different shows around the Bay Area. So there was this girl, and I don't even remember her name. She used to live down the street, and she was from Santa Rosa, and she used to throw these house parties. So I would go to the house parties, and my boy Ray Love would show up. I met Ray Love there. Now Ray Love was in a crew with Tupac, also called One Nation. And so normally back in the day, the way that hip hop worked was that if our crews had the same name, or if we were rappers and we shared the same name, we would battle for the name, right? So if you're supposed to be rapper cool guy and they're rapper cool guy, well then we'll set up a battle, and whoever wins gets to keep that name, right? But we thought it would be different. We were like, well, if they have a One Nation, and it was Tupac, it was Ray Love, it was their DJ Diz. I don't remember the other guys in the crew at the time, but I remember Dizzy and Ray Love. We're like, well, maybe we should just connect with them and make the crew even bigger, right? And do shows that way. And so at the time I worked at this record store called Tower Records. And so I did that to kind of just do two things. One, to be up on the latest music, because hip hop wasn't as big as it is right now. It was very underground. Everybody didn't know where stuff was. If you wanted record, you needed to know people and things like that. So while I was there, I met this dude named Hilo. Hilo knew the guys from Digital Underground, and when Digital Underground put out their record release, they had their record release party. It was funny, man. Like, I was so consumed with hip hop. Like, I was risking a lot when I was young, right? I wasn't very disciplined. So like, my manager was like, hey, I know Digital Underground has a record release party coming up. Don't be there, because you got to work that day. And I was like, of course. I mean, why wouldn't I? You know, I'm going to be there. I love this job. And then, of course, that morning I was like, you would be shocked, but as it turns out, I can't make it. Click. So I went to this record release party, and I went early. So when I went in, I saw Ray, because the place was pretty empty. And he was like, hey man, this is Tupac, the guy I was telling you about. And I was like, hey, what's up? And somebody was like, hey guys, let's take a picture. Like, I think it was like 5 seconds. And then so Tupac puts his arm around me, we all lean in, and we take this picture. Like, nobody was famous, nobody, you know what I mean? Like, everybody was just like starving artists trying to figure it out. By that time, the group that I was with, One Nation, had pretty much dissolved. And I think Tupac's One Nation had also dissolved. But we decided we would be cool, we exchanged numbers. And we stayed friends until he died. One of the things that kept us close was the woman I mentioned before, Keely Nyasha, with the Black Panther Party. She became kind of like a political science mentor of mine. And she taught me a lot about Black history. She used to have like cassette tapes with like Huey Newton interviews, George Jackson interviews, like crazy stuff that you would just not have. You know what I mean? She was like a true high-level archivist. And she changed my life. She really did change my life. Just like the brothers at Masjid al-Islam. They totally changed my life. You know, when I was in high school, I was kind of a binge drinker, you know, and I knew in high school that if I continued to drink, I would die. I knew I would die if I kept drinking. So when I found out that in Islam, like, you couldn't drink, I was like, that may be the religion for me, because I need to stay alive. And all of the drunk people that I knew were Christians, just being honest. But I know they're not supposed to drink too, but they were. So I was like, if Islam for business, this is going to be good for me. This is going to make my life easier. And it did. It made me healthier. I ate horribly. And it made me more conscious of how I ate, especially because of the influence of the Nation of Islam at the time. But what it gave me was unprecedented. And in that, Kilun Nyasha was like, I would like your help in trying to free Geronimo Pratt. And most of you probably do not know who Geronimo Pratt is, but he is he was a political prisoner, right? Who America set up for a crime he did not commit, and he spent 25 years in jail for a crime he did not commit. And so she was like, "Will you help me free him?" And I was like, "Yes." So he was Tupac's godfather. Okay, and so he used to give me messages to give to Tupac. Tupac would give me messages. I would give to Geronimo, and this went on. He eventually was freed after a long time, though. You know what I mean? And why am I mentioning this? Because when we look at how some of our communities struggle, we don't always think about how different systems of oppression invest in our downfall. This is something that we really need to be mindful of. When you see Black America, specifically I'm talking about Black America, but this also applies to the Latino community and obviously the Native American community. When you see them in shambles, it is not an accident. Okay? There was a program called COINTELPRO, the Counterintelligence Program. I want you to think about that. Counterintelligence. Okay? These were the people who attacked Malcolm X, attacked the Nation of Islam, attacked the Black Panthers. And when you really look at what those organizations were doing, is they were cleaning up the ghetto. They were, trying to get people off drugs. Specifically, Tupac's stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, who is in jail right now with cancer, also like Geronimo Pratt set up. You know what I'm saying? And things like that, right? What was one of the main things Mutulu Shakur was doing in his youth and young adult times? He was using acupressure to counter drug addiction, like heroin addiction, right? These guys were really into, using natural medicine to get people sober. They were trying to get drugs off the streets. They were trying to shut down the gangs. And the United States government spent an untold amount of money. Like, we don't even know how much money they spent undoing people who were just trying to keep Black people in order, off drugs, sober, and living well. Like when you look at the confusion around, Malcolm X's death, that's not an accident. Who killed him? We don't know. Was it the Nation of Islam? Was it the United States government? Was it this person? Was it that person? It's meant to be chaotic. They invest in the chaos of Black America. They invest in the downfall of our children. They invest in schools that stay broken. They're not broken by accident. You need to understand this, right? So, when you see how Black America suffers, when you see the chaos, if you listen to rap music now and you listen to all the mayhem in it and you look at it and you weigh it against the hip-hop music and the rap that was coming out in the late 80s and early 90s, there is no comparison. There is no comparison to the amount of positive stuff that's in it, to the resilient, right? How do you stay strong through whatever's going on? We can find a way out. You don't hear that in rap music anymore. And that's because those labels have invested in the worst parts of hip hop. Look, I'm not gonna lie, hip hop comes from the hood, it comes from the streets. And what's in the streets? Mayhem, drug use, all kinds of, abuse, whatever. So you're gonna get that in the music, but that's not who they are. Because we know when we was 15, 16, 17, early 20s, a lot of us today, I'm 52, we didn't know what we was doing. We didn't know what we were doing, right? Because you can't know what you were doing because you haven't lived long enough to know, okay? So, I say that to say when you see where we are as a people and when you see where a lot of today's youth are, understand that a lot of systems of oppression have designed these downfalls. A lot of these systems of oppression have coordinated the chaos that we have today, Give you an example. Look at the chaos around Tupac's death, right? It's no less chaotic than Malcolm X's murder. It's no less chaotic. It's no less chaotic than Jam Master Jay, who killed Jam Master Jay, who killed B.I.G. Like I could do a whole list tonight, right? And we wouldn't know. And I tell people, those unsolved murders are not accidents. They don't care. They want the chaos to stay there. Oh, because those guys are probably the ones that did it. Oh, no, I think it's those guys that did it. And, right, we know that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, beware of suspicion. Mm-hmm. And all they do is stoke suspicion between the young people, east and west, north and south, this kind of rapper, that kind of rapper, and just keeps the chaos going while they get paid the entire way. So, what I can tell you about Tupac is that he was incredibly brilliant. I mean, he was still one of the smartest people I ever knew in the history of my life. Still, right? And I'm not going to lie to you. I know some smart people. I know a lot of smart people. I know professors. I know rappers like RZA and Jizza from Wu-Tang Clan. They're smarter than most people you'll probably ever meet. Straight up. No joke. Not kidding. All the time. Smart. Crucial intelligence. Razor sharp. Not accidental. Self-taught. Autodidactic. You understand? One time, the first time I met RZA, I'll come back to Tupac in a second. I just want to give you a sense of understanding. RZA's giving this talk at a place called the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. The Commonwealth Club is kind of an upper crust place where people will have high-end discussions. And it's the first time I met him. I met him through somebody else. I'm sitting in the crowd watching him. He and I had only spoken for 15 minutes up front. In the middle of the conversation, he's in a room of like political and social elites. And he's like, yeah, I just want to tell everybody in here that you should all read the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. I'm talking about there's like 200-300 people in this room. I was like, oh my God, let me see what happens here. And so it's a Q&A thing. And the woman's like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, let me tell you about the Prophet Muhammad. Whoosh, he goes on this whole thing for like 10 minutes. He's like, everybody, you should all buy the Sirah. I was like, yo, this dude is not playing. But like, I've been around him in other situations where I've watched him like break all kinds of different things down that dealt with like how the human body functions to philosophy. Right before the lockdown and the pandemic, I went to Staten Island with him and a Shaolin monk named Xian Ming, and we were teaching these young professionals about chess and philosophy and martial arts and stuff like that. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? And so, why am I telling you that? Because he came from the same generation of hip-hop that I did. Same generation of hip-hop that Tupac came from, and all of us were super serious about knowledge. The main thing that I know, and the reason why I bring up RZA specifically, is that RZA is the only person I know that read more books than Tupac Shakur. People will be like, oh, what's Tupac like on the phone? I can tell you what it was like. Hey, what's up, fool? For real? Yeah, for real? Yeah. What's up with the show? Blah, blah. And then he would say, have you ever read Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton? And I'd be like, no. And we keep talking about something else. A few minutes later, have you ever read More Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey? Yeah, I read that. Okay, cool. Talk about something else. A few minutes later, oh, have you ever read, no one ever talked to me like that but him. And he really read these books. So like, Tupac had way more money than me. He was way more popular than me. He was way more everything, okay? And I'm not a jealous person. I'm still not a jealous person. But the one way that I was jealous of Tupac was his knowledge, was his veracity in reading. I've never known another person. And so when people look at Tupac and they look at his legacy and they say, oh, well, look, here's a guy who's been dead for so long, but, his estate can put out a whole album tomorrow, right? Could put 10 albums out. He was recording all this music, right? How could you record that much music and be done? You couldn't. How could you put out all this meaningful music and be done? You couldn't. Okay? And when you look at other rappers and they'll always say, he's one of the highest pinnacles of hip hop ever. And there's so many rappers from all these different generations will be like, well, I'm just trying to be like Tupac. I'm just trying to be like Tupac. But how many of them are reading? How many of them are in the masjid? How many of them are studying? None of them. So how do you think you're going to be like him and you don't read? And then you look at today's rap music and you can really say, man, so much of it sounds alike. Why? Well, I can tell you why. Because back in the day, part of your art was meant to differentiate yourself, not look and sound like everybody else. Originality was key. And so this guy might talk about stuff that deals with black power. This guy might talk about stuff that deals with straight gangster stuff. This guy might talk about stuff that deals with Islam, but it's only the Nation of Islam. This guy's talking about 5% stuff, which is slightly different. This guy's talking about Sunni Islam. This guy's talking about vegetarianism and things like that, right? And it was important to like have different ways to differentiate yourself, to sound different. But not only to sound different, but actually be different in the music that you made, in the way that you rapped. Like you wanted different rap patterns, you didn't want to sound like it. But the way that today's modern hip hop, a lot of these labels are like, we want you to sound like that guy. We want you to sound like her. We want you to sound like them. Because they're not interested in artistic expression or sharing of the truth or things like that. So it's much harder for today's rappers that do have, thank you, man, that do have knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, have good intent, right? Right? They can't even, we don't even know who the next Tupac is. Whoever he is, he ain't getting signed. I can tell you that right now. Who's the next Public Enemy? We don't know. Next KRS-One? We don't know. Next Rakim? We don't know. Might be in the room now, but his fame won't come because he's getting signed. It won't come because MTV is like, we need somebody who's kicking science on the mic. That's not what they're saying. So when you see these kids drugged out, tattoos all over their face, acting crazy, pushing gang life, them becoming snitches, all that stuff, because it's not what hip hop was about. It's almost, it's like what they used to say about hip hop in the late 80s and early 90s is what they turned it into now. Like they made the lie a real thing, right? You know how they say if you say a thing so long, right, it become true, right? And so, you know, Tupac was unusually hilarious. Like I know, like, you know, people see, like, you know, he had, you know, Thug Life tatted on his stomach, and, you know, you see these things of him talking crazy about Big and other people, whatever, you know. And that was a real part of him. That was a real part of him. But he was hilarious. He was super funny. I laughed with him more than I laughed with any other rapper. And I laugh a lot. I laughed with him more than I laughed with any other rapper. He was hilarious. He was always like doing impressions of people and stuff, and we were really silly. And like I know, like because of the music that he's put out, especially the stuff that he made toward the end, you know what I mean? Like people have this idea of him probably like being super mean and angry and like probably like kicking kittens when he walks down the street and stuff like that. But he was not like that. He was hilarious, right? But then you might say, okay, well then if that's the case, well then what's going on with that part of him, right? Like I've heard people say like, oh, well, you know, he played the character Bishop in Juice, and then he thought he was like that, and then he just got put out there, and not really. What I mean is that Tupac, you know, he grew up, you know, fairly tough. Meaning, like, you know, his mother was one of those Black Panthers that came through in the wave of COINTELPRO. You know, she struggled. She had addiction issues. You know what I'm saying? He moved around a lot in a broken home. You know, when he was in Marin, he was in this area called the Jungle, and a lot of you wouldn't know the Jungle, but it is grimy. Okay, like that's all I'm saying. It was grimy. That I remember one time my homeboy met somebody who lived in the jungle, and I remember when we pulled up, I remember going like, yo, like this is dangerous. Like we might not make it out of here. You know what I'm saying? Like, cause there's hoods like that. Every part of the world had them hoods where like if you don't know somebody, you come up missing and get hurt. You know what I'm saying? And the jungle was one of them places. And Tupac grew up around a lot of those kinds of people and witnessed a lot of violence. You know what I'm saying? Himself, like a lot of us do. And so when people see how he acted, I just want to really say that, you know, Tupac was someone who really was into loyalty, friendship, and love. And so if you betrayed him, that love became inverted. You understand what I'm saying? So like if he had your back and then you betrayed him, every way that he felt about you would be, you know, you turn that thing upside down, right? And then he's like, oh, that's what it is now? Well, all right. You see what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that was a good thing about him. I'm just saying that was my experience with him. That he loved really hard. He was really loyal. And then if you turned around on him, like it was the betrayal was so heavy, it was hard for him to stomach. And so that was a big thing. Now, you know, most people, you know, they know about, you know, the first time he got shot at this place called Quad Studios, where he was going to record or something with Big and them, and then in the lobby he got approached by these guys, a whole bunch of stuff happened, he got shot 5 times. Well, one of the things that we don't talk about when we look at, you know, when I talk about this investment against the black community, is we don't look at the role that the media played in the violence between these rappers, right? Now, without getting into some major conspiracy theory stuff, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist, one of the things that I did learn in looking at the United States government and things like that is that, you know, even though COINTELPRO probably doesn't technically still exist, right? The counterintelligence program is not actually still a thing in its original form, right? That these kinds of programs will change names, right? So a politician would be like, COINTELPRO doesn't exist anymore. And they're right, because we call it something else and you don't know about it, right? Like that's what the deal is. It's not that the thing is actually gone, right? And so one of the things that they talked about, I read a few years ago, and I don't know how much truth there is to this, but I would be shocked if it wasn't true. I would be shocked if this wasn't true, is they said that one of the main things that the government did was rather than try to control journalists, because you can't do that, and rather than try to control news outlets, they started creating news outlets, right? So you're reading a magazine, it's actually an operation. You don't know it's an operation. They know it's an operation, okay? And so this is a huge part of what happened to American journalism and the collapse of it, okay? This is aside from the digital media space. I'm just talking to you as a journalist and a writer right now. So, but one of the things that happened was a lot of these hip-hop publications stoked the fire between East and West. They stoked the fire between Tupac and Big and Diddy and all that. And it was very problematic. I remember getting a call from one of the editors of The Source, and he was with another editor of The Source. And they called me laughing about Tupac having got shot at Quad Studio. Like, oh, y'all soft, that's why Tupac got shot, woo, woo. And they thought it was funny, which I thought was weird because they were both black men. And then I knew one of them, because like, you know, back in the day, hip-hop journalism was different, right? Like, yeah, freedom of the press and everything, right? But if you said something unflattering about a rapper's album, you weren't really just saying like, oh, I like this album or I don't like this album. Like, if you said you didn't like that album, they were going to have a hard time eating, right? Because they're trying to get paid just like everybody else is trying to get paid, right? So a bad review, if they were in the dope game and now they're trying to, you know, rap, and then you say that their album was no good, like you're cutting into their money for real. You're cutting into their attempt to leave the dope game. So then like they might catch you at a club or like a house party or something and you would get mopped up, you feel me? So I was like, hey bro, didn't you just get mopped like 2 months ago, bro? Like, and then he was like, oh, it was a whole thing. And so, you know, this type of stuff was real common in hip hop at the time. But, you know, like a lot of the journalists were supremely irresponsible in the way that they covered that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have covered it, but they should have covered it from a place of healing. Let's bring Big and Pac together. Let's squash East and West because it's all just good music and we want to focus on. That's not what they did. They stoked these fires, right? And they made it worse. They made it much worse. So even if we can say like, we don't know who actually killed Tupac, we can say without a question that a lot of journalists and a lot of magazine heads and a lot of editors-in-chief have gunpowder on their hands. You hear me? Because they were not responsible. They try to get paid. They try to, like, I know some of you guys probably don't know much about journalism, but there's this phrase called, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like what's exciting is what we're going to go with first and things like that. And they do it. And even still, right? Anytime a magazine or a website's kind of drying up on the hits, what do? Let's look at what happened to Tupac, because they know people want to know about that. Let's talk about who killed B.I.G., right? Because this is part of that whole thing, right? Where they're like feasting on the art of people they helped kill. Do you understand how dark that is? I want you to really think about that, how dark that is. This is what American media and a lot of global media has become. And one of the reasons I write much less than I used to is because I don't want anything to do with that kind of journalism. And I never did. And so when you look at like the body of work that I've done in hip hop writing, you really don't find inflammatory stuff. You don't find it. Because I knew as a young black man then, the last thing I wanted to do was have my pen have any role in the downfall of another human being. Even if I disagreed with them philosophically, that's one thing. But to actually try to undermine them, to undermine their safety, to undermine their friends and family safety, I was never going to have a hand in that. So now, let's look at what happens when the situation, a little bit before that, he went to jail for a crime he said he never committed. And it's at that time that he read The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli, right? And one of the things, and this is how I'm trying to like tell you guys, like, it's because of Wu-Tang Clan that so many people have started to play more chess in North America. It's because of Wu-Tang Clan that so much in the black community has kind of, you've seen this resurgence of martial arts. You've seen a resurgence in philosophy. You've seen an Eastern philosophy like Taoism and Buddhism and stuff like that. You've seen a resurgence in things that deal with Islam, because they talk about Islam a lot in different aspects of the Wu-Tang Clan songs, right? Like, American schools, and I don't know how schools here are doing it, you guys can tell me because I am from here obviously, right? American schools have been broken, at least since the 80s, okay? And so nobody was teaching the hood about Niccolo Machiavelli. Tupac taught the hood about Niccolo Machiavelli, right? The Wu-Tang Clan was the ones that talked about the art of war, and you know what I mean, and Sun Tzu and other stuff like that. So when you see a lot of this stuff happening in the hood, you gotta know, that's not because the high schools were like, okay kids, today we're gonna talk about military strategy and philosophy. No, it's because hip-hoppers were doing that, right? It's because hip-hoppers were like never underestimate the power of a wise artist. Like don't do that. And even when you look at the Cyril the Prophet, peace be upon him, you find that the poets of that day had power. The poets of today have power, right? But rather than fear the poets, they distract the poets. They, you know what I mean? They invest in the wrong kinds of poets, and they smother out the voices of the poets that will speak to freedom, wisdom, justice, and equality, right? And so when he got out, not long after he got out, I saw him briefly at this park on the edge of the Mission District. And it was interesting because he had all these different people around him that he used to have. And the exchange was cool, but then this other dude that I was kicking it with was like, yo, man, did you see Pac at the barbecue? I was like, I did see him at the barbecue. He was like, man, what's up with those dudes around? I was like, I don't know, man. He's like, he had a lot of yes men around him. And I was like, he did. He really did have a lot of yes men around him. And it was funny because this was a thing that later, I believe, led to his demise, right? Because he had, like, you need people around you. Excuse me. Allergy. You need people around you that are not yes men. You need people around you that when you're slipping, they will tell you. You need people around you, and I don't mean in a mean way. I mean from a place of love and not judgment. Like, hey man, it might be better if you did this. Hey man, it might be cool if you did that, right? But at that point, when he got out, and I understand, that whole situation in Quad Studios was bizarre. He didn't know he could trust, you know what I mean? He knew people was trying to harm him, so he needed more thugged out dudes, you know what I'm saying? So this is going to put you around a certain element, right? But the problem with that was that they didn't care about him either, right? They really didn't care. They just wanted to be around a celebrity. They just wanted access to him. And I think in some ways he wanted access to, you know what I mean, to their strength on the street. So in that initial time, we talked a little less. And he was different from that point forward because he had to be, when your life is on the line, we can all say now what we would do, but until you're the person who's actually dealing with the threat and until you're the person who actually has to deal with it, it's a problem. But this thing about, being mindful of the company you keep is huge. I have a whole lecture that I've done before called, From Machiavelli to Machiavelli, The Strategic Life of Tupac Shakur. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now. There's slides, it's a whole thing. But what I will say is that one of Niccolo Machiavelli's quotes is that, you can tell the quality of a leader by the men that they have around them, okay? You can tell the quality of a leader by the men that they have around them. So, unfortunately for Tupac, I told you how smart he was. Unfortunately for him, he was the smartest man in his crew. Of course he was smarter than Suge Knight. Of course he was smarter than pretty much every rapper and producer on his label. Of course. He was well-read. He was mentally tough. And so these things made it so that he was the smartest person in the room. And if you find yourself to consistently be the smartest person in the room, you need to have new friends. You need to have people who are smarter than you. I value my friends that are smarter than me. And sometimes you have friends that are going to be smarter than you in different ways, right? Like maybe in general, you might be smarter than them in life choices, but they're really good in finance. You better be paying attention. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you're smarter than them in all these other ways, but they're smart when it comes to how to deal with navigating social situations. So you need them. Seek smart people consistently and improve your circle. Always be seeking to rise in that way. So, I'll tell you one other quick story about Tupac that I wrote before. It's an article. It's called "When Thugs Cry." You can look it up online. It's called "When Thugs Cry." And what happened is back in the day, like I said, Tupac, he was very proud, of his heritage, and he was very proud to be black, and he was very he was someone who really, he loved knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, and he really had love, especially for women. He had love for Muslims a lot. He was very respectful of Muslims, especially Muslim women. He really was never, he was a silly guy, but he was never the type of person to be making people, especially women and children, feel unsafe, you know what I'm saying? And so one day he had jaywalked, right, which is like when you cross the street outside of the crosswalk. So these cops went to give him a ticket. And when they went to go give him the ticket, they were like, well, what's your name? He was like, oh, my name is, Tupac Shakur. He was like, Tupac? What kind of name is Tupac? That's not your name. What's your real name? And he was like, my name is Tupac. And the cop was like, what kind of mother would give their son a dumb name like Tupac? And Pac was like, bing, and swung on and became this whole thing, and they really beat him down. He had cuts and bruises. It was a whole thing. He ended up suing the police department, and I believe he got one of the first early major settlements against the police department. You know what I mean? Especially at that time. So, a few days after that happened, Public Enemy was coming to do a big show with a rock group called Anthrax at the Henry J. Kaiser, and I was going because I knew Chuck D at this time. I've been writing for the hip-hop publications. I know Chuck. I know a lot of people in Public Enemy, and etc. And so I was going. So I go early, and I go into the back area, and this was weird because the same day there was a huge fire, what they called a firestorm. There was a big fire in the city, and like even though I lived like 30 miles away, like ash was falling down in my city. It looked like Oakland was gonna burn down. Like it was really bad. Like if you look up Oakland firestorm, you can see crazy footage on YouTube. It was bonkers. So I left several hours early because I was like, they're probably gonna like shut the city down, not let people cross the bridge because it's a big fire. So I went early. I got to the venue early, and I walked into the room where Chuck D and them was at. And normally he has this group of security called Security of the First World. And none of those dudes was around. And so I walk in, he's asleep. He was laying on a table that was a little bit longer than this. It was like a vanity table. It had like all the lights and stuff around it. But he was laying on it on his side. He was sideways, asleep. Because they're touring, whatever. So I looked around. I was like, there's no security in here, man. Like, Chuck needs better security. This is not good. But I was like, he must have felt my presence. And he opened his eyes. He was like, hey, what's up, Bishop? That's my nickname. He was like, what's up, Bishop? I was like, what's up? And so he was like, what's been up? So we started talking. I was like, yo, man, like, I don't know if you heard, but the cops beat Tupac really bad, you know what I'm saying? He looks bad. I seen him. It's crazy. He was like, oh, word. He was like, you know what? He goes, if you see Tupac tonight, let him know that we're going to do a show for him. We're going to do a song for him, tonight. I was like, all right, word. So as the venue fills up, and this is Public Enemy in their prime in a stadium, okay? There's thousands of people at this thing. So I show up, and, let's say like between me and the microphone to my right was Tupac. But there's all these people between us, right? Shoulder to shoulder, jam-packed. So I see him, he's still got, like Vaseline under his eye. He's got cuts and bruises. The cops really harmed him. And I'm like, yo, I was like, Chuck told me they're gonna do a song for you. Right? Now, he's like, what? I'm like, Chuck told me they're gonna do a song for you. He's like, right. So we do that 3 or 4 times, and then he just, we both kind of like, all right, it's not gonna work. Well, why was Public Enemy gonna do a song for Tupac, right? It's because back in the day, I told you his family was in, yeah, y'all know I'm thirsty, huh? Thank you, bro. When he was a roadie, so Digital Underground is this group that blows up out of the Bay. He first is kind of like a dancer and like a roadie, right? A guy would unload the bus and stuff like that, right? And little by little, he's kind of, climbed his way up into stardom. And so during one of those tours with Public Enemy and Digital Underground, someone stole a bunch of equipment from Public Enemy. This infuriated Tupac. Why? Because he's got this connection to the Panthers, and they talk about Black Power, and they talk about, all this justice. So apparently when he found out who had stolen stuff from Public Enemy, he took a bat to him and gave him a once-over, right? Which Chuck D thought was really cool, right? Even if he kind of overdid, right? So then they told Digital Underground, yo, Tupac's gonna be on our tour bus, right? Because there was a big headliner, and so that's why Chuck D and Tupac were tight. So just kind of give you a backstory of why Chuck D had loved Tupac so much, right? So he tells me, this thing. I know, I'm trying to tell Tupac. Pac can not hear me, and we're trying to talk. It's like whatever. So later on in the show, Public Enemy's doing their thing, and and it's funny because there's a podcast called The People's Party by Talib Kweli, and they interview Chuck D, and he mentions this situation. He talks about it on the show, because I wrote this article, When Thugs Cry. At some point, they decide they're going to do a song honoring Tupac. It was 1991, so they had the album Apocalypse 91, but I don't know what song they did, but they did this song to honor Tupac. And the whole city knows who Tupac is. You understand? Like, he's not a stranger at this point in the world, in hip-hop. Yo, listen to what I tell you. When they started doing, they were like, yo, OPD, on our boy Tupac, there's no love, da-da-da. And remember, the city's on fire. The whole city's burning. So the energy is crazy in this venue. And the whole place is like waves of like human beings just jumping. I can't even like replay it as it happened. But what was crazy is like, I'm caught in this wave of people like, whoosh, right? Because everybody's shoulders are whoosh. And I'm looking, I'm like, yeah, that's just what he was talking about. So I turned to him to be like, this is what I was trying to tell you. But I'm trapped between people, and Tupac is trapped between people, and his face is locked on the stage, man, and he's crying. He is crying from gratitude. Crying because his humanity is being seen. Crying because a group like Public Enemy would take the time to honor his pain, his hardship, you see? And I saw him crying, man. And it was like, it was a very tough thing for me to stomach. And every time I tell it, like, it's so real, I almost start crying again, so. I mean, it's, that's the kind of person that Tupac was, right? That somebody like Chuck D would alter their show for him. You know what I'm saying? And so now, let's fast forward to when he actually gets killed. So, by this time, I'm working at a law firm, and I'm a paralegal, and you know, it was a Tyson fight that night, and so he was up there, you know, Death Row's kind of at their apex. I just want to remind you guys, like, Death Row Records was an independent label that got themselves up to being worth $500 million. I want to give you a sense of Tupac's stardom. That between him, Dre, and Snoop, they were worth $500 million, that label was worth. I mean, there was never, and I don't think there will ever be another label like Death Row again, for better or for worse. So they go up there, and there's some type of altercation, and one of my friends, Dre, not Dr. Dre, just a friend named Andre, who I call Dre. What's up, Dre? Was in Vegas, not to really just go to the fights, but just to kick it. You know, the whole city's kind of like live wire, whatever. And so I went to the movies, and when I come back, he used this message on my phone. He's like, hey, man, Tupac is dead. He's like, he got shot, and the police are, he was in a car with Suge. For some reason, it looks like nobody had guns, which was totally unbelievable because it was Death Row Records, and that was one of the main things they were known for. And I'm like, oh my God. Now, it's not even on the news yet. Like, I mean, this had just happened. So I'm sitting in the room, and I'm like, okay, I know his manager. I'm not sure if Layla was still managing him at the time, but he had this manager named Layla Steinberg, who's awesome for a bunch of different reasons. But I was like, I don't want to call Layla. And then I'm like, I don't want to call, like, I don't even know his mom. Like, I don't even want to ask anybody for her number. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And later it comes on the news. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to worry about telling people because it's worldwide news, whatever. I go to sleep, and then when I wake up, they're like, you know, Tupac is alive. Right? Because remember, my friend just saw, you know, them put Pac in, he's not moving, whatever, so he thought he was dead. So for me, like, Tupac died twice, you understand? So that was supremely painful for me. Because, like, I want you to think about someone that you love, really believing that they're dead, and then having them pass later, like, that still messed me up. So now, the media is still being crazy irresponsible, and I get out of work and leave the law firm, and I get in the car, and my ex-wife is driving, and Big's on the radio. He's on a, I don't remember if he was on KSOL or if he was on Cameo. I don't remember at the time. But the first thing I remember was like, why is he here? What is he doing in the Bay Area? Like, and he's got this song called Going Back to Cali, okay? Which the beat made by Puffy was kind of in the production of West Coast hip hop, which they hated. And then he has this one particular line in the song where he goes, I only have beef with those that got beef with me. I shall annihilate thee. Tupac's dead. You out here dropping this song like it's funny, bro? Like what, you know what I'm saying? Like, what are you doing? So I looked at my ex-wife and I was like, he's here right now? She was like, yeah, he's here right now. I was like, look, I just be honest. I'm not even no kind of gangster. Anybody that knows me knows I've never pretended to be a gangster, right? But if you be around hip hop and you be in the streets, like you just know people and you understand certain psychologies, whether you agree with them or not. You know what I'm saying? I know people in hella cities, Oakland, San Francisco, Marin, San Ho, that would not have hesitated to put it on big. You know what I'm saying? And that's just on general principle because of Pac. You feel me? Like, that's not even like nothing. I was like, he needs to leave. He needs to like get out of the city, like now. Like, I don't know what his management was thinking. I don't know what anybody was thinking, but they're tripping. And I knew some of the DJs at the station, you know? So I asked her, I said, should I call up there? Should I tell him that he should leave? Should I tell him? And she was like, I don't know. And so I'm listening to the interview, and he goes, they said, what are you doing tonight? And I'm like, yeah, let me know what you're doing tonight, because, bro, you should not be here, dog. And he's like, oh, well, I'm getting on a plane because we going to LA because it's the Soul Train Awards. So then I go, okay, well, I'm not going to call in, right? Because I'm like, oh, he's leaving. I'm not thinking, though, because I'm just thinking about the danger I know is waiting for him in the Bay, right? But what he did is he went from the frying pan into the fire, because LA, that's where death row is. What are you doing, bro? You know what I'm saying? You shouldn't have been in the Bay because we love Tupac more than anybody. But you definitely shouldn't be coming from the Bay and going to LA. Bonkers. Seriously. I'm like, this is nuts. So, but at the time I'm like, oh, okay. Well, at least he's leaving the Bay. So, good luck to him. So I didn't call. So, I go to the movies. I come home. I turn my answer machine off because I like to sleep. I go to bed. I wake up. I look on my, we had these, let me talk to you guys about old history, kids. We used to have a thing called an answering machine, and it had a cassette tape in it, and when people would call your house and you weren't home, they would leave a message on this cassette tape, and then you would push a button on this contraption, and it would play the messages from everybody who you missed in that day. And sometimes, if you were really rich, it would tell you how many messages there were. And you know how many messages I had in the morning? 21 messages. Well, pray tell, what could have happened in the last few hours that would warrant 21 messages to be on my phone? Boop. Yo, Bishop, man, they killed Big. Boop. I can't believe it, bro. We're at the hospital. Boop. Yo, man, what is going on in LA right now? Boop. And that's all it was. Message after message after message after message. And I just looked at my ex-wife and she was like, you were right. And I was like, yo, I didn't want to be. You know what I'm saying? But like, I don't know who his manager was at the time, bro, but they failed him. I don't know who his label was. Everybody on his label failed him. Anybody who thought it was a good idea to come to the West Coast was tripping. Anybody who thought that song was a good idea was tripping. But this is what Jahiliyyah does, right? This is what the age of ignorance will cultivate in you if you don't have a sense, right? And your ego will be so big, and stardom and your friends will have you so disillusioned, you will walk straight into a death trap smiling. And I was not happy about that. Like, I really need to be clear. Like, I was not happy about the death of Big at all. Right? But again, back to this, media problem, back to this lack of leadership with the media heads and things like that. And so, nobody wins when that happens. And now you look at these estates of these men that are so big, like, if we see what all of the hatred could generate in terms of money, we can only imagine what the peace would have brought, right? Right? How much more money could they be making? How much more could the hoods be helped? How much more? Right? Because these guys die young before they really care about the future of their kids, before like where the hoods they live in that they can invest in. They don't understand those opportunities yet, and they die before they have a chance to be the men that they could be, right? And so, you know, this is a tragic thing, right? And so this is where, you know, like, again, I know, especially to the parents and the grandparents and the OG uncles and aunties in the room, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure you're like, yo, like, my kids should not listen to hip hop. Like, I totally understand why you would feel that way. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't blame you for having those concerns, but I think that when you do that, like, the problem is that, you know, you don't ever know who God intends to raise up. You don't know. And it could be just seeing you in a kufi walking by their record store, you could change their life, right? It could be that, you know, some of the stuff that comes in this music, like I said, like, you know, some of it is definitely negative. Some of it is definitely like sexist and violent, and I'm not going to defend any of that, right? But some of this stuff has absolutely saved a lot of people's lives, and I'm one of them. And I'll tell you, you know, the youngsters, like, I know, like, you know, the streets and the gangs and all that stuff, it looks exciting, right? But, you know, like, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was asked, like, what Islam was, and he said it was just good advice, you know what I'm saying? So, like, you need to take that good advice, y'all. You need to take that good advice, because I've been at way too many parties where the violence gets crazy, right? And not too long ago, I was a teacher, a school teacher. I was talking to these kids, these high school kids, and I was like, what are you doing? Oh, we're going to a party, you know, blah, blah. And they started talking about how, you know, might be some people from the other side of town, it might be kind of problematic or whatever. And I was like, hey, let me tell you something. I said, and I was speaking to the whole class because it was a Friday before the weekend hit. And I would always say, you know, have fun, don't do anything stupid, don't do anything violent. I would always say that, or something near it. And I said, you know, let me tell you, if you need a knife or a gun to go to a party, let me tell you something. It's not a party, okay? It's not a party if you need a gun or a knife to be there. It's just not, okay? And you need to really understand that parties happen with people who care about you, who make sure that you're safe, who want you safe, and who want good things for you, okay? And, you know, in closing, I just want to let you know that, like, to the elders, as I'm sharing things with you, you know, like, I know hip-hop can be scary. I know a lot of, like, artistic endeavors and whatnot can be things that you probably don't really want for your kids. But one of the things I can tell you, if you look at Golden Age of the Moor by Professor Ivan van Sertima, it shows you how much the poets of Al-Andalus used to get. You know what they used to get? They got mansions, they got orchards, they got livestock, okay? So they could do poetry, man. And meanwhile today, we'll argue about whether, like, poetry is haram or not, whether hip-hop is haram or not, right? Condemning the poets that are trying to preserve our children and keep them inspired. We need to, if we see that the governments and if we see that certain entities will invest against our children, then we need to be investing for our children. I teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, chess, I teach meditation, right? We got enough space for Jiu-Jitsu in this place. I know we do. We got enough space for Jiu-Jitsu in all these masjids, and grappling is sunnah. But everybody wants their kids to be doctors and lawyers so much they don't want their kids wrestling. Wrestling? Nah, bro, you better get this human anatomy book popping, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, I get it, right? Wrestling, you better be looking at this finance book. No, I get it, right? But grappling is sunnah for a reason. Grappling is sunnah for a reason. The Sahaba trained 2 hours a day for a reason. You know, when you look in the Quran, it says that the men are guardians of the women, not kings and rulers, guardians. How many of us can even guard ourselves? Right? Come on. We have to raise the bar for ourselves, and we have to invest in the best of what we can be. We have to invest in the best sports consistently. Y'all youngsters running around here sometimes trying to be like rap dudes. These dudes are bonkers, man. They have no knowledge of self. They're crazy and they're on drugs. And you trying to be like them. But when they get their life right, what do? They convert to Islam. So what are you doing? You already are born into what's best. And that doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't do artistic things or have athletic endeavors, but understand that the advice that comes from this sunnah, the advice that comes from this prophet, peace be upon him, the advice, and those that have followed his advice, from Habib to Malcolm X, you know what I'm saying? Come on, man. We have great examples, you know, so let's use them, right? Let's use them. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your time with me. Thank you for listening to my story. If I offend anybody or I said anything inappropriate, please forgive me. And now, we've got some awards.